studio. It's Froyle here. I'm so glad you've joined me. Now, before we jump into all of the paint, I want to shout out a big thank you to my fabulous Patreon community. Thank you for your encouragement, your support, and being in my world. It's always so much more fun having people to play with. In Patreon right now, we're doing my 100 days of collage. We're going through the class week by week. Every Friday, the lesson uploads. It's so beautiful to see what creations everybody else comes up with the prompts. I absolutely love this class. It's the most comprehensive mixed media class I've ever created, and I love sharing it with my Patreon community. So, thank you. Also in level 2, Patreons receive every single month an inspiration pack full of beautiful collage papers that come right from my studio. So some of the papers that I create today will end up in the inspiration packs next month for my beautiful patrons. Thank you to you all. I really do appreciate you very much. Today we're going to be creating beautiful collage paper, really easy, really fast, lots of it. So if you're having a hard time getting started, don't know where to begin, then this really might help you today. It might really inspire you for how to create beautiful collage papers for your mixed media projects. Now I'm piling up my work table with a whole heap of different types of paper. Traditional Chinese rice paper, mulberry paper, kozo paper in different thicknesses and absorbencies, and we're going to have a little experiment and see what really works the best. Now first of all, you want to make sure you've got a plastic tablecloth down on your workspace so that your paper isn't going to stick to your table and you'll be able to pull it off easily. Then I like to start by giving it a little spritz with water to make the paper more absorbent and so it receives the paint better. Now in my layers of beautiful papers, I've got the traditional Chinese paper at the bottom because it's the thickest, very absorbent because it's used for calligraphy, it's used to sucking up the ink. It's going to work really well. And then I have a few layers of kozo paper and rice paper, the really fine, almost transparent paper I've got sitting on the top. My theory is that the paint and the inks and the sprays and all of the beautiful colors that I'm going to saturate my paper pile will soak through to the bottom, and each layer should receive some of that glorious color. Well, that's what I'm hoping for. That's the crazy idea that I've come up with today, so it's going to be a lot of fun, very messy. Make sure you've got plenty of plastic around on the floor, even up the walls could really help. Now if you've got your delicate rice papers on the top of your pile, they could pull and tear when you start drawing on them. I'm using the fabulous Posca Mopper paint pens. I had so much fun with these acrylic markers. A few months ago I did an episode using them. They're very thick and very runny. The paint comes out beautiful. They make great lines, fabulous for drawing with. So I'm using the red and the yellow today. You can get a whole box of them or you can buy them individually, and you can have a look in the links in the description under my video if you want to find where I got them from. Of course, my whole table is covered in this paper pile, not just the little section that you're seeing. So here's the angle from the other end of the table. I know, why do one piece of paper when you can do 20? We're doing it fast, saturated colors, and we're going to create a whole heap that we can then use for mixed media or jelly printing or collage or really anything. We can create beautiful projects out of this very simple technique. Right, so next I'm throwing on some fluid paint, and this is out of a high flow bottle. Absolutely fabulous because it creates beautiful lines and you can create fabulous patterns. I'm spraying it with a whole heap of water. The marks won't actually flow like they do when I'm doing the tissue, but they will absorb into our paper pile so that the layers underneath and right to to the bottom should get some of this glorious colour. You really are going to have to be brave and very liberal with your paint to be able to spread it right across your table and through those various layers. There's so many ways to apply the beautiful paint and the colours. It really is a whole lot of fun. Now I've pulled out my fabulous red ink from China. I went to visit my son in Shanghai, and yes, I came home with an extra piece of luggage full of art supplies. This beautiful Chinese red ink is amazing. It's so thick and it's so dense with its colour. I'm putting it on with my absolutely favourite mark making brush, which is the pastry brush from the dollar store. I absolutely love it. You flick it, you move it, you wipe it. It makes fabulous lines, great textures, and when you're flicking it like this, it creates a splatter pattern, lots of texture. It really looks fabulous. Don't forget, I did say you should put plastic around your walls. Definitely cover the floor before you start. Now the other way I like to apply paint is to use up empty paint bottles. This gold is a beautiful fluid paint bottle that I was using to create my dance moves when I was designing my fabulous patterns, and there's little bits of paint left in these bottles. So I fill them up with water, give them a really good shake and squirt them onto the paper. They make great lines, great textures, fabulous patterns, and if you then keep spraying it with water, all that paint's going to soak into the layers underneath. It's a great way to use up the empty paint bottles. It just makes me feel so happy to get all of that pigment out. Sprayings are a fabulous way to add another layer or texture to the papers. I'm using the eye inks here in coffee. I also pull out my absolute favourite bronze shimmer, a little bit of spritzer here and there along the top of the surface of the papers. It's just going to deepen the colours, add a bit more texture. You may not really be able to see it exactly by the time you finish throwing all the layers on, and especially if you're drowning it with water, but it does deepen the colours and it just adds to the texture. Again, you can fill up bottles that are close to being empty, top them up with some water and spray it on. It adds water to the paper to make them more absorbent, and it uses up all those fabulous remains in the bottles. Yes, it's one of my favourite ways of creating collage paper because I hate throwing out bottles that still have pigment in them. Now, removing wet and soggy papers is going to be a challenge, especially if you put the soft fibrous rice papers on top like I did. Moving them when they're so wet, yes, they can tear, they can flip on themselves, and they can become quite a crumpled mess. But don't stress out because it ends up being amazing collage paper, and I'm going to show you how good they look. You need to remove the top layer of your paper pile, put it on some plastic, and then depending on how many layers you've put on top of each other, you might need to move the second layer as well. Because if you don't move the paper and they dry all together laying on top of each other, they're pretty much going to stick together and it's going to be one thick clump of paper, whereas you want the thin layers, the beautiful fibrous textured pieces that are now fully saturated in color. And what's beautiful about using the mulberry paper and the rice paper is that it soaks through to the other side. Oh, wait till you see it when it's dry. It really is worth all the trouble. Now, the floor of my studio is completely covered in wet and soggy papers, and it did cover my arms trying to get them off the table. But you can't let that worry you. It's such a great way to make a whole heap of papers at once. And then you can turn them into all sorts of beautiful artworks. So if your floor is absolutely covered, remember I said to put down plastic. I use cheap plastic tablecloths from the dollar store, laying them all out on the floor, and then put down my wet papers. I did actually paint myself into a corner of my studio and I had to tiptoe over all of the wet papers to actually get out, but that's part of the creative process. It's a whole lot of fun and it really is worth the effort when you see how fabulous they dry. Now, once you've removed the top layer off your paper pile, well, you can then use scraps or offcuts or remnants to soak up some of that paint that's sitting on the underneath layers. So I've picked up some wet strength tissue. I seem to have little strips left over for when I cut the pieces to put on my gel plate, and I'm putting them on the paint here just to soak up some of that wet, beautiful paint and water, because it's going to colour my offcut scrap and then I'll be able to use it for something else. It's just such a great way to make paper really fast with beautiful luscious colours. Now once you've removed the top layer or even the second layer as well, soaked up some of that paint and water with your offcuts, got your floor all completely covered in pieces of wet but beautiful drying paper, then the last layer that you have on your table might need a little bit more attention. My bottom layer is the traditional Chinese rice paper. It's really thick, really fibrous, and it's soaked up all of the beautiful paint and inks, and it looks gorgeous. But I just want to throw on some more, so I pulled out the gold ink from China that I picked up when I was there, and it's a really thick ink, extremely metallic. Putting it on with my favorite brush, flicking it around, and I really did have a lot of fun. There might be some flicks now on the camera I'm looking at, but it all worked out in the end. I did manage to get it off the glass door. I absolutely love it. It's such a beautiful rich colour and it looks so good sitting on the top of that glorious paper. Now that your studio is completely covered, the floor is a sea of wet and drying glorious paper, your table is saturated, you have to tiptoe out of your space, go and have some lunch, maybe go for a walk, because all of that paper has to dry. Right, so leave everything to dry completely before you try to move it. Otherwise, it will rip to shreds, especially the rice papers or the very fibrous, soft and thinner papers. Make sure you've got it all on plastic and don't try and move it until it's completely dry. Now, here's some things to note. Smaller pieces are easier to handle than really big ones. Of course, I had to try and use really big pieces because I wanted to use them in some bigger collages, but the little papers were a lot easier to get off the table onto the floor and made a little less mess. So, note to self, next time I'm going to use more little pieces. They're just so much easier to handle. Different papers have different absorbency, so they respond differently to the types and amounts of paints and inks and fluid mediums that you're putting on the papers. So it's quite an experiment. You want to really notice what papers you're using and how they respond to the paint. Also, the amount of water that you put on the paper will also create different effects, different marks, different colors. They do dry a lot lighter than when you've got them soaking wet on your table. So don't freak out if everything's like really dark and oversaturated, because once that water does evaporate, they will dry a lot lighter. You just need to experiment, try some different ideas, try some different papers and see what works and what you like best. I really like the fibrous rice papers, even though they're hard to work with. The mulberry papers are a little bit stronger, especially the Kozo ones. They handle the water and the paint a lot better. Now, if you put your paper on plastic, then when you pull it off, it will lift up fairly easy. It really is a whole lot of fun. And because it's fabulous rice paper or mulberry paper, the paint and the ink with the water will absorb into the fibers and the color goes right through the paper onto the backside. So you've got two choices, either the direct application on the front or the beautiful colors that have absorbed through the paper and have come through onto the back. It's a win-win. Don't worry about your ripped or torn pieces, because they'll work really well in collage. They'll make some beautiful organic shapes. There's always going to be some ripped and torn papers when you're using so much fluid, but they'll work out really fine for your creative mixed media projects. Now, what can we do with all of this fabulous paper? Some of it works better than others depending on how much paint and water it absorbs. So if you've got a piece that you're not quite happy with, you can have a play with some mark making techniques. These are some of my absolute favorite tools. I'm using the catalyst blade, putting on some white paint just to give it some highlights and a little bit of a pop in some of the areas. Then I pull out this very expensive tool. It's a paper tube with rubber bands tied around it, and it rolls across the paper, leaving kind of marks in a bit of a continuous line, and I absolutely love it. It's so easy, and depending on whether your tube is bigger or smaller or how many rubber bands you add to that tube, it creates different marks. Then I've pulled out my absolutely favorite circle making shape. I absolutely love this. Yes, it's another tube cut off, and I've used it so much it's very thick with acrylic paint. The smaller circle size is the lid of the spraying, so I know it's really easy to find mark making tools at your fingertips. Finally, I put on some marks with my favorite foam stamp, which you can find at PM Artist Studio. This is my Dashes foam stamp. I really like it. It works so easy and it's so quick, and it covers the paper with so many beautiful marks. Look how beautiful this paper is. It's all dried up now. It's looking great. I love the marks on it, and I'll be able to use it for all sorts of different projects. Now, of course, we can pull out the jelly plate, always the jelly plate, and we can use the same mark making tools on our gel plate and create some little highlights or some touches, or just add some more to the beautiful colored papers. These papers look so good with just a few more of the colors and textures from the mark making tools, and of course I had to pull out the beautiful gold ink. You've got to have a bit of bling. Splashed it around with my favorite mark making brush. It really does look beautiful. Then I decided I wanted to run one of these beautiful papers through my printer to put my dance move marks on. Now, I showed you how to do this a few weeks ago in this episode. Have a look there and you'll see how I use my digital collage papers to add beautiful textures onto your collage elements. Don't forget to tape it securely. There's a little hint. So it came through the printer, so easy, looks beautiful. That's going to add a beautiful element to one of the collages that I'm yet to work on. And of course, all of these beautiful papers make fabulous collage elements. Don't get stressed out about the ones that are a little crinkled or that got bent up because you picked it up when it was wet. Oh, is that just me? When I moved it to the floor, it got a little crinkled in the process. You can't worry about that because look how beautiful the shape is. It's very organic. It's got some great texture to it. In fact, some of these have the most fabulous raw edge. They look amazing in collage. So don't throw anything away. Just put them in a pile or a box or a drawer. And then one day when you're creating something and you want something special for your collage, you'll know where to find it. Now, all of the paper absorbs the paint and fluid and inks quite differently. This one here is one of the beautiful Kozo mulberry papers, and look how glorious it is. Both sides has got fully saturated colors. I absolutely love it. I love the raw edge, and it's really, really soft. It's going to work very well. And depending on what paper you use, creates a different response. This is also a Kozo paper. It's a lot stronger, so it handles the mark making a lot better. This paper is glassine and it snuck in. I don't know how it got in the pile, but it did. It's a very plastic paper. There's no absorbency in it, but it's created a really nice texture from sitting in the middle of all of those paints and inks and colors. It's pretty good actually. It printed up much better than I thought it would because it's so plastic. The wet strength tissue looks really good too. These were the off-cut bits that I used to mop up the paint and the inks after I took off the first layer, and look how good they look. The colors look fabulous. It's just beautiful. It's a great way to colour a whole heap of papers at once that you can then use for all of your projects. Now, what I like about having so many papers is you've got so many elements to use. So in my studio, I have different collages in different sizes and at different points of creation. This one here was kind of already half made, but then it needed an extra little piece. So I put one of these beautiful papers on it. The colour and the markings and the textures just really contributed to what was already on there. I love having collages in different stages because then when you get into a bit of a frenzy, create a heap of papers, you've got some different collages that you can add them to straight away. And then I look at it and think, does it need some more or is it finished? That's always the question. And I'll put it aside and add something else. With this one, I decided to add some of my digital paper with my dance moves. I printed it onto white tissue. And what I like about printing onto the white tissue is when you put it into your collage or your artwork, it goes transparent because the ordinary dollar store tissue dissolves into the background and embeds in your collage. It's absolutely fabulous. Now, there is a trick to being able to put this through your printer, so make sure you watch that episode. I'm not being responsible for jamming up your printer. But it works really, really well. I do a whole heap at once so that when I want them, I've got them. I put it into this collage, added some of the beautiful black Kozo paper. Always love that. Don't forget the discount code for the Kozo paper. And I added a little focal point in the middle. Now, is it finished? That's the question. I'm really not too sure. I could add a little something else to it, so I think that I might just put it aside for another day until I come up with my next brilliant idea. Now have a look at all of these beautiful papers that I can create some artworks with. I'll put them in a box or in one of my drawers so I can find them when I want them. I'm thinking we need to create a bigger collage next week. Yeah, that's a really solid plan. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you were inspired and encouraged. It's quite a simple idea, laying up all of your papers, putting on some beautiful fluid paint and some inks, creating some textures, a little mark making, and creating a huge amount of fabulous collage papers that you can then use another day for your glorious artworks. You do have to experiment, try a few ideas and see what works and what you like the best. Now don't forget to check out the links in the description under the video. You'll find discount codes and there's more information on my website froyalart.com. So come and join me next week. I think I should definitely put a larger collage together with some of these beautiful papers. Won't those colours just be glorious?